Thanks for joining us for the Alamogordo Mayoral Forum. I'm Fred Martino. Early voting is underway in Alamogordo. Election day is Tuesday, March 1st. Our candidates are running for the final 2 years on the term of Mayor Susie Galea, who's resigning March 1st due to family commitments. There are 6 candidates running for mayor, and they are going to be introduced in a moment. We should note that candidates Jeff Alt and Mike Rosales are not with us. In alphabetical order, joining us are candidates James Baker, Richard Boss, Michael Elliott, and also joining us, Robert Hahn. Now, here's how this all plays out for our forum. Candidates have 90 seconds to answer each question, and there is a timer playing in each camera to kind of keep us on time. This is a forum, so there will be no rebuttals, and that brings us to an important ground rule. It's really the only ground rule in our forum. Candidates are not permitted to mention their opponents by name. Before we get to the questions, each candidate will have 90 seconds to introduce themselves and tell us why they are running for mayor. And we begin with James Baker.
Hi, Fred.
Hi.
Great to be here. I'm James Baker. I'm running for mayor of Alamogordo. I've spent most of my life in Santa Fe and raised a couple kids there. I was a teacher. I'm a retired teacher now, and I wanted to find a place that had a little more relaxed lifestyle than Santa Fe. That's really gotten to be a big city now. When I saw Alamogordo, I just thought this is a great place. And if Alamogordo didn't exist, I'd have to invent it. I love the place. I love the mountains above it. I love the nature that's there. I love the slow lifestyle that's there. I wanted to join this race because I felt that I could be a little bit of an alternative candidate to the usual. This is a conservative part of the state. It's not like Santa Fe. And I see it in a bigger picture. I see the things about Alamogordo that could use improvement is probably just the city government. I think they're spending too much money. And I thought that maybe I could get the message out that there should be some fiscal responsibility there. Anyway, that's who I am. And it's great to be here. Thanks, Fred.
It's good to have you here. We move now to Richard Boss.
Thank you, Fred. My name is Richard Boss. I'm running for mayor of Alamogordo. I'm almost a lifelong resident of Alamogordo. We moved to Alamogordo, my family did, in 1955. I was 8 years old, and I attended 3rd grade through 12th grade in Alamogordo Public Schools, and I went to NMSU Alamogordo and wound up coming over to New Mexico State after I completed my studies there and graduated here. After I graduated from college, I went to Phoenix with a national public accounting firm, spent a couple of years there as an accountant. And after a couple of years, I got homesick, wanted to get back closer to Alamogordo. So we moved to El Paso, and that got me closer. I was there for a couple of years and wanted to take my family back to Alamogordo. And we moved back, and I opened a public accounting firm there. I had obtained my certified public accountant status, and I was licensed both in New Mexico and Texas. So I was able to go from Texas to New Mexico. Opened an accounting practice there, practiced some 20 years, wow, I'm out of time.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Boss, and now we move to Michael Elliott.
Well, thank you, Fred. It's a pleasure to be out here tonight with you all. A little bit about me. I grew up in the military. My father served 20 years in the Navy, but before that, they had moved out to Alamogordo back in 1955, and my father joined the Navy, like I say, did 20 years. And I myself moved back to Alamogordo in 1991. And then I followed in his footsteps after high school and served 20 years in the military. When I was getting close to retiring, we were looking at where we wanted to move to raise our kids. And having been around the world, we had lots of different choices. But really, I wanted some place that had that small town feel that I was used to growing up, some place to be safe for the kids. And Alamogordo was really a no-brainer for us. So we came back here in 2009. And since coming back, overall, I'm really proud of the city. I've seen a few things that have kind of disappointed me in the way the city's been run. So that's why I threw my name in the hat last year, actually shortly after the announcement came up, Mayor Galea, for her not being mayor anymore. And like I say, it just offered the perfect opportunity that I could step in, that I could help to be one, actually to help guide the city back in a good direction. Thank you.
Okay, and now we move along to Robert Hahn.
My name is Rob Hahn, and I'm running for mayor. I've been here for a little over 5 years, and we moved out here due to family. My wife's father is here, and we decided that this was the place we wanted to be. A little bit of my history: I did a short time in the military, decided it wasn't for me. I came out of the military, moved north to the Carolinas. I built a recycling company. I covered Florida all the way to Pennsylvania, becoming the largest tire recycler in the southeastern United States. I've since sold that. We moved out here. We're now business owners out here with our own cigar shop. A little more laid back atmosphere, and we like it. Decided to run for mayor because I was unhappy with some of the things in the city. The only way to do anything is to get involved. I'm a fire chief at La Luz Fire Department, and it's all volunteer. So that's what I do. I get involved and I help out where I can, and that's what made me decide to run for mayor, and here we all are.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that introduction. Thank you to all the candidates for taking time out to speak with us at KRWG. This is a big responsibility, and it's certainly encouraging to see that there are actually 6 people that are running for Alamogordo Mayor. And a lot of times in some of our smaller municipal elections, you will routinely have races where folks run unopposed. So it's very encouraging to see a lot of interest in the Alamogordo mayoral race. And again, the election is on March 1st, but early voting is already underway. We're going to get to our questions now, and not unlike many areas around the state and the nation, Alamogordo is working on some concerns in terms of its budget. So our first question deals with that. Are there services the city should eliminate or reduce to save money? And we begin with Mr. Baker.
Thanks. Well, that's really my primary idea. I like everything about Alamogordo. There's some great things there, especially for a small city. I think that everything has to be on the table, because I think the biggest threat to the lifestyle of Alamogordo is actually running out of money. It's not just a matter of the city commission is spending too much money, which I think they are, but I think the state is in trouble too. I see this all in terms not just of Alamogordo, but as Alamogordo being part of New Mexico. New Mexico is, as we know, the oil and gas revenues are running out. I don't think that's going to help Alamogordo at all. I think now is the time for belt tightening, and I don't see a lot of that happening. Not only does the city commission seem to just want to rubber stamp a lot of programs, new programs, I don't see any will on the part of the city commission to look at places to cut expenditures. And I think cutting expenditures and having to really take a hard look at any new sort of spending is going to be critical.
Okay, same question for all of our candidates, and we continue with Richard Boss. Are there services the city should eliminate or reduce?
That's a tough question at this point. We definitely are having a budget problem. Over the last several years, They've been using cash reserves to balance the budget. Revenues are not keeping up with the expenditures. But I don't, it's hard to say you can just start cutting expenditures. I think each different program and each different area in the city is going to have to be looked at very closely to see where there can be cuts, and that's obviously the first approach. But we can't go on forever taking cash out of our reserves to balance the budget. We'll run out of cash, obviously. Another important thing, I think, would be to increase our tax base to increase our revenues. And the new business has come into Alamogordo, additional gross receipts tax. That's a better way than trying to cut services. I'm sure there are some areas where we can do some cutting, but as far as eliminating any specific program, I can't name one. I'm sure that there's areas where we can trim things down in a given program, but as far as just cutting out a program, I don't know of any that we can do that with. We're going to have to really look at this long and hard to figure out how to balance the budget. We can't go on forever like it's been going.
Okay. Michael Elliott.
Definitely with the budget, that's something that the current commission is looking at, and the new commission, they'll be taking over that once elected in. As far as eliminating services, that would be the last thing I'd want to do, because if you're looking at eliminating, now you're looking at possibly cutting jobs, and that's something that we definitely don't want to do. I'd want to look more at working with the economic development team and doing targeted ads to companies that are looking for places to move to try to move here to increase our gross receipt taxes to get more money that way. As far as with services, getting back to that, something else that I would rather look at first is see if there's anywhere where we have redundancy of services going on, where maybe we can combine those two. Like if we have, say, a service in the county and a service in the city that are doing the same thing, we can combine those into the same one. And then another thing could possibly look at doing is maybe just paring down the amount of money that we're sending to certain services to cut down to only what they need, instead of just where you get people that they'll send in a request for money for the next year just because they're worried about losing the money, so they might spend a lot of money at the end of the fiscal year. But we need to work with them to find out, okay, what do you actually need, instead of giving them over what they need.
Okay, Robert Hahn.
I do feel there are some services we can trim, and like Mr. Elliott said, I don't think getting rid of stuff might be the answer. As a mayor, we're not able to just cut services or anything. I think the best thing that probably as a city we can do is sit down with the mayor, the commissioners, the city manager, the department heads, and take a long, hard look at our budget and what we can trim. There's always room for trimming. But I think rather than eliminating, if you sat down as a group and went over this budget and decided what's necessity, what's overfunded where we can trim it back and save the city some money, I think that would be the first route I would want to go. I do agree with bringing in other business and such forth like that, but as far as services for the city, it needs to be looked at, and it's going to take some time to get it done.
Okay, of course, the other part of the balance sheet is revenue, and we move to that now. And this has really actually already been hinted at in some of the answers to the first question about cutting or reducing services. And our second question is, would you vote for a tax increase, yes or no, and why? And we'll begin with Mr. Boss.
That's a tough one. Under the circumstances, I have to say I probably would, but that would be after a great deal of thought and effort went into trying to trim the expenses and also look at any services that we could do without. But I'd have to look at it really long and hard. I mean, everybody here pays taxes, and we don't like them, or we don't like them increased, and that would be the very last resort. But if it meant that we had to do that to continue a service that was very important, I would have to say yes, I would raise taxes.
You mentioned, because we still have a minute left here, you mentioned in your first answer the gross receipts tax in particular. Mm-hmm. Tell me about your feeling on that and why you cited that as the first choice.
If businesses move to town, they're going to be paying gross receipts tax. If we have a motel come in, they're going to be paying lodger's tax. Those are taxes that would increase revenue and probably not as much as expenses. Therefore, we'd have that would work towards balancing our budget.
Okay. Mr. Elliott, same question for you.
Well, everything is on the table in order to get the budget going and keep your city going. Initially, I would definitely vote no for it because, again, being a taxpayer myself, I don't like paying them either. As an absolute last, if we had to in order to survive, then I'd have to say that yes, I would.
Okay. Mr. Hahn.
Well, unfortunately, taxes are a necessity. We need them. Do we want them? No. Would I vote on them? At the very last resort. I also pay taxes just like everybody else. I do not want to add more taxes to anybody if we can avoid it. I think if we looked at our budget, looked at other avenues, that would be the route I would go before I voted yes on any taxes.
Okay. And Mr. Baker.
Well, Alamogordo is not a wealthy community overall. There's a lot of people living there who live below the poverty line. There's a lot of senior citizens there. They really can't afford even $1 increase in taxes. These are the people I'm thinking of, and I mean it. I would cut taxes. I'd lower property taxes. And that's why I have such an emphasis on looking at all of the city expenditures. I mean, it's obvious. If you are looking at raising money by raising taxes, that's completely just out of the question for me. So we've got to look at everything. Things can be cut. I know they can. I mentioned something about the zoo, and I just threw that out there, that do you really need a zoo as a community? Well, there was an uproar. Obviously, the people want a zoo. But do we need everything in there? For example, and this is the way I'd look at all the programs. Using the zoo as an example, could we just do away with the coyote exhibit? This is what it comes down to. I don't know what the coyote costs to feed, but we can see coyotes out in the country. Does it have to be in the zoo? Every single program I would put under scrutiny, just like that, to save every dollar I could. And I think there's enough to where I could lower taxes.
Okay. We move on now to question number 3. And this is something that really has been in the news in Alamogordo for some time. The citizens in Alamogordo passed a bond to build a family fun center, but now there's concern that it's not enough money to do everything that was promised when that vote occurred. So the question is, how should Alamogordo move forward on the Family Fun Center? And for this, we begin with Michael Elliott.
Well, definitely, by all means, we should definitely move forward in the construction of it because the people voted on this back in 2014. This is what they were promised when they voted and said that they wanted to have it. So now it should be on the part of us to come forward and actually follow through with that promise and make it.
Mr. Hahn.
I agree on that. When you put it out to vote and everybody agrees, it's time to move forward. This has been a long time waiting. I know they've had some issues with the feasibility studies and other stuff, but I think there is a way to move this forward, and I think the city needs to do that.
Okay. And Mr. Baker.
Okay, I'm going to have to disagree. This has to be re-examined. When it was first voted on, only 2,400 people voted for this. This is in a city of 30,000 people. This does not sound like a mandate to me. And when they voted on it, it was supposedly a $4 million project. This is exactly what I'm talking about with spending money. A line has to be drawn in the sand. Now this thing is supposedly up to $10 million, and my fellow candidates would be willing to raise taxes to do this. I don't know if it needs to move forward or not, but it needs to be re-examined for sure.
Okay, and finally on this issue, Mr. Boss.
I feel like voting is kind of a pillar of our country. And that's what we use to make decisions. We vote on it. It doesn't matter how many people vote, but if the majority votes and they win, that's the direction we go. Everybody has an opportunity to do it. I support the Family Fund Center. I believe it would be good for the community. I think it'll bring additional economic growth. I think it's been very poorly handled by our city commission and by the city manager's office. We've had opportunities to build this thing within the $6 million budget and pass them up. And they just go back and forth, and they've had three or four now, three studies to see if it's feasible there, and the last one was a very poorly written report, and they're going to rely on that to decide how many lanes to build. The voters were promised 24 lanes. That was what was advertised, and with the other amenities, and I think we ought to work very hard to see that we meet the demands of the public in the vote.
Okay. Well, as I mentioned earlier, there are grave concerns about the budget in Alamogordo, and so a number of our questions tonight do deal with fiscal issues. Actions have actually already been taken in Alamogordo to deal with the budget, including freezing positions in the Alamogordo Police Department. So our next question is, should full staffing be restored to the Alamogordo Police Department? And we begin with Mr. Hahn.
Subject dear to my heart. Yes, I believe full staffing should be restored. It's vital in our city, in any city, to have a fully staffed police department. I think that we need to look at the budgeting on it. I think the city needs to work with the unions of the police department. They're going through a police chief change at the moment. The police chief is retired, and they're working on getting another chief in there. So I think there's some issues that need to be resolved there, but we need to work on the morale of the police department, and we need to work on the funding for the police department so they can be fully staffed. Alamogordo doesn't have a SWAT team, doesn't have specialty teams, and it's very hard right now for them to have a full staff with the morale the way it is. So I think there's a lot to be done there, and I think they should open it up to full staffing.
Okay, Mr. Baker.
When I talk about looking at expenditures, it's just for this reason. The police department should be a primary concern. These people risk their lives. They deserve all the support, 100% of the community, the city commission. It has to be fully staffed. It should even be larger than what it should be on paper. And the police need to be paid in equity with places like Albuquerque. There's no sense to cut anything or to look at anything about the police and say we're just going to cut corners here.
Okay, Mr. Boss.
I think public safety is, if not the most important, certainly way on top, most important thing in a community for the safety of the citizens. Problem we're having is not only recruiting officers, but keeping the officers. And we're experiencing now other communities, some of them back on the East Coast and on the West Coast, coming into Alamogordo trying to recruit our officers. Police officers across the country, not in Alamogordo, but in other areas, have kind of had a target put on their back. And it's very difficult now to recruit officers. And I think we're going to continue to see this, but I think it's very important that we try to get competitive with the rest of the police departments in New Mexico. That's difficult when Albuquerque pays $28 an hour and we pay $16 or $17 an hour. But we definitely, it's a very important issue that needs to be addressed. And also, one of the candidates mentioned morale. The morale in the police department definitely needs to be attended to.
Okay, Mr. Elliott.
Well, also the police force is something that's near and dear to my heart as well. I have several friends who serve in police forces in other cities, and we do have issues here. And not only, to echo my fellow candidates, not only with recruitment but in retention, and that's something really you run across not only in the police force, but I've seen it a lot during my time in the military. And it's definitely not an issue that we can merely just throw money at to try to fix, because we've seen police officers that, because of low morale, they've actually left to go to lower paying jobs in other places. So we need to actually engage with them to find out, okay, what can we do for them individually and as the police force to help them with their morale.
Okay, well, you've really all addressed or hinted at our next question, which also deals with the police. And there is concern in the city of Alamogordo about the city losing police officers, in part due to the pay rates. So we begin with you, Mr. Baker. How do you assess the pay rates for Alamogordo police officers?
Well, you can look at cities in New Mexico. I think the lifestyle in Alamogordo is better than most cities in New Mexico, so I'm not sure about morale problems. I'd like to hear from people who know. But the pay rates, the first time I ran into recognizing that this was a problem was when I was in City Hall and I saw a notice for employment on the board, and they were recruiting. There were employment openings for police officers starting at $16 an hour. I mean, I made that as a teacher when I was a beginning teacher, and I wasn't risking my life, maybe my sanity, but I wasn't risking my life. I think what Mr. Boss says about looking at Alamogordo's pay scale as compared to Albuquerque is a great place to start. Why can't we have the best paid police officers in New Mexico?
Okay, Mr. Boss.
Well, the difficulty is we go back to the budget problems, and it's difficult when you're $800,000 short on your budget. It's difficult to start giving anybody raises. It's a very serious problem. I think it's hard to compare maybe to Albuquerque. We're a smaller community. Also, you have to take into account benefits that are given. There's certain perks that the people in different forces around New Mexico get. Like some get their medical paid, others get some get half of it paid, some get the total amount paid. But it's going to be very difficult to raise the pay for a police officer to $28 an hour in Alamogordo, I can tell you that.
Okay, Mr. Elliott.
For paying them, I definitely agree completely. I mean, these are officers who are willing to lay their lives on the line for us day in and day out. So I feel they definitely need to be paid more. They deserve to be paid more. But you have an issue going back to the budget, is that we have to find the money first to be able to pay them what they deserve.
Okay, Mr. Hahn.
I think our pay for our police department is super low, as well as our fire department. But I think that to get them up to where they need to be for Alamogordo, it's going to go back again to the budgeting. It's going to go back to sitting with the commissioners, the department heads, the city manager, taking that budget apart and finding what we can trim and what we can shift to other places. Like Mr. Boss said, we're in a deficit. We're struggling with a budget now. There's no room to just all of a sudden start upping pays, but there's ways to make it happen. And I think that if we sat and went through it and diligently worked on it, we ultimately could raise their rate of pay. And I think that would also boost the morale at the department. Very, very important thing for Alamogordo is to have that department, have it staffed, and have it functioning properly.
We're a little ahead on time because we haven't used the full 90 seconds for many of our questions. And so before we move on to our next official question, I want to do a follow-up on this one because it really doesn't just relate to the police department. In your answers, you have, talked about the fact that, especially compared to maybe certain communities, there is now a fairly large gap in pay between the Alamogordo Police Department and other departments, and that results, of course, in a problem where it's tough to keep experienced officers. But this is something that is happening in a lot of different jobs, in a lot of different cities and counties around the state of New Mexico, and in other states for that matter, that if yearly adjustments are not made to salaries, even when inflation is low, it's usually around 2% a year. But very quickly, 5 years, you have a 10% deficit. And what happens is that then you have this enormous gap that is created between different salaries in different places. I want to get your feedback on this because this is probably one of the hardest things in government to deal with, is this, we're focused on the short term, but there are long-term consequences for short-term decisions. Thoughts on this?
Well, this is where I live. This isn't just a matter of the police in Alamogordo. Alamogordo, there are no good paying jobs there. I mean, on the military bases, some people have specialist jobs, but in general, you've got people working for the national minimum wage. You've got firemen that are low paid. The teachers are getting low pay. Everybody that works there, whether they're in a grocery store, whether they're in a professional position, these are low paying jobs compared to any place else in the country, especially any place in New Mexico. This is a problem because it gives Alamogordo a character of low paying jobs. I would propose that Alamogordo could enact a minimum wage increase. I would propose that all of the city workers receive pay increases. And I know this is a problem because I was at a commission meeting where not only were the city workers complaining about low pay, but they had elected a leader, a union leader, and when he went before the city commission to voice their concerns, he was fired. Now, there seems to be some sort of idea in Alamogordo that we need to keep low-paying jobs. If you could bring everybody's job up, Alamogordo would be known as a place that has well-paying jobs. This would attract business. This would attract retirees. This would attract people to move. But most of all, Fred, it would attract, or it would keep, the young people in Alamogordo there.
Okay, other thoughts on this? Well, we did cover that, and it was something that I thought was very interesting to focus a little bit more on as we continue. I want to go back to some of our other main points in the city of Alamogordo, and this is, our next question is actually something that we heard about when we were visiting in Alamogordo recently from some of the citizens there. This question is, how would you assess the condition of Alamogordo roads and other infrastructure? And we'll begin with Mr. Elliott.
Well, the roads in Alamogordo definitely need a lot of help. We have our major thoroughfares are in fairly good condition, but we have a lot of roads within the city that are in desperate disrepair. We do have a current plan right now that's laid out for the next 5 years where the different streets have actually been prioritized to have work done. It's currently going on, but have a long ways to go on getting those fully repaired.
Okay, Mr. Hunt.
I agree. The roads in a lot of Alamogordo are just terrible. They need a lot of work. and it's going to take some time to get a process in place to determine what's worst, what's best, what needs it now, what needs it later. I know the city's working on some grants and such forth for roads and infrastructure. A lot of the problems there is they get the road grant in, but they don't get the infrastructure, the utility grants in. So they have to rush to do one and hope they get the money for the other. So it's a lot of work on the city as well to try and meet demands and not waste money or not lose money that they've gotten in grants or such forth like that. So I do think it's a big issue that needs to be dealt with.
Okay, Mr. Baker.
Well, it's kind of a mystery to me when everybody talks about the roads in Alamogordo. I was in Santa Fe. The potholes are bigger in Santa Fe. I can guarantee that. And I spent a few months with my daughter in Houston, Texas. If you want to see some bad roads, go there. It'll tear the suspension off a Hummer. I think I see this as being a state problem, a national problem. The infrastructure is crumbling. What I have noticed in Alamogordo is that there seems to be problems with some of the water lines. You can drive through the street and there's a big, huge puddle, a river that's been coming overnight, must have been a water main break. The next day, it's still there. Now, in the desert, this is just outrageous, that they're allowing water to run down the streets. Why aren't the city crews on it immediately? Maybe because they feel like they're not getting paid enough.
Okay, Mr. Boss.
I think what's happening is there's a lot of streets in Alamogordo that need repair, especially some of the streets downtown. But they're trying to get the money before they tear that street up and replace it. They want to have the infrastructure money so that they can put a water line down. Instead of tearing it up, moving that asphalt, putting it down, going through all the expense of that, they want to wait until they have the money for the water line. And we've experienced that on White Sands Boulevard. They waited a long time on that, and we finally got it. And they waited until they could replace all the water lines before they finished it. There's some areas, though, that are just, they're really bad. And some of the areas in the downtown, I happened to turn off on one of them that I hadn't been on in a long time, and I was shocked at the condition it was in. But it's definitely going to have to be assessed. But again, we go back to the budget problems and bonding issues, and some of those things there's other things right now that have a little more priority, although I'm not saying a road doesn't, it definitely does. But I think the water line, before you pave it, I think you ought to have the water line under the street, so you don't have to go back and tear it up. I think that's a smart way to do it.
Okay, well, as some of you have indicated, roads and other issues, funding issues in the city of Alamogordo, sometimes there is help that's available from the state and the federal government. That brings us to our next question. How would you work to get more state and federal funding for Alamogordo? And we begin with Mr. Hahn.
I think the biggest thing there we need to focus on is grants. There is a tremendous amount of grants out there that we can obtain, as well as working with our state representatives and other people that can help us funnel this funding into our area where we need it. But my main focus would be grants.
Okay. Mr. Baker.
Well, I agree with that. There must be some places out there, if we just find the energy to go out and look, research it, write the grant proposals. As far as looking to the state and the federal government to help us with infrastructure or things that those monies would apply to, I don't know if the state's going to have a lot of money to give us something, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't try. I'd be willing to just go camp out on the state capitol steps. I've been there. A lot of this gets done by personal contact. And that's one of my big ideas for Alamogordo, is that we don't need to be so isolated. I think the people in Alamogordo have to see themselves more as being citizens of the state of New Mexico. Not that we don't, but we should develop stronger contacts with Santa Fe.
Mr. Boss.
I think we need to work with the legislators at the state and federal level, especially since we've got Holloman Air Force Base there. That gives us kind of a connection with the federal government too. The problem is New Mexico is suffering some real severe problems now balancing its budget. With the oil prices down, the gas prices down, severance tax revenue is way low, and it's going to be difficult to get some of those. Some of those grants are going to go away in all likelihood. And I don't know that there's as many of them out there now. I know the city works very diligent on obtaining those grants, and I'm not sure there's going to be a lot of them out there in the future.
And Mr. Elliott.
That's something that'd be very difficult to do, as alluded by the other candidates. Money's drying up all over. It's not necessarily available for everybody. We do have White Sands Boulevard that's already covered at the state level because it's a combination of highways 54 and 70 passing through town. I know it's also been looked at of having some of the other roads in town designated as major thoroughfares to be covered by the state as well. As far as getting grants, definitely I would be in favor of that, but it's going to be a huge uphill battle to try to get that funding because we're competing against all the other cities in the state to get those.
Okay. Well, in addition to, of course, seeking additional funding from state and federal sources, many communities around the country have worked on collaboration to save money, and this brings us to our next question. Are there ways Alamogordo could better collaborate with Otero County? And we begin with Mr. Baker.
Well, yeah, that's critical, of course. I'm not sure I understand what the problem is. These are both governments that should be working for the good of Alamogordo. Alamogordo is the big city in Otero County. Again, I just need to go over and talk to some of these county people. I want to find out if there's problems with thinking that we're separate entities. And if there is, I'd like somebody to explain that to me.
Mr. Voss.
I think there are a lot of areas that we could probably collaborate more with Otero County. It seems like there's been kind of, and this has gone on over the years, kind of a wedge between the county and the city. One wants to do this. I was involved in, I went to a meeting regarding the flood situation on the northern part of town. And that was one of the things that they brought up is we were not really collaborating as we should and suggested that we do. For the Corps of Engineers was recommending that. And I'm not sure why it is, but it seems like that each one wants to kind of do its own thing. And there's obviously some areas where we could get together, animal shelters, things like that, and eliminate a lot of the duplicate costs.
Mr. Elliott.
Oh, definitely by all means. This is something that just, whenever I hear about the county government, the city government not working together, it just boggles my mind because Alamogordo is the seat of Otero County. So why you wouldn't be working together, I just don't know. There's so many areas we could be working together for the betterment of not only the county but the city as well. As mentioned by my fellow candidate, we have flooding that comes through the north end of town, and every time we get a heavy rainfall, I go out there and I see this water flooding down through the streets, causing damage to private properties. And we have individuals that they're actually building their own barriers to stop the flood water because the city just hasn't acted quick enough to do it. So definitely we need to work together on that. And also not only with that, but also whenever we have services that are doing the same thing, we could combine those services to help cut down on the budget to help both.
Okay, and finally, Mr. Hahn.
Well, I deal with a lot of the county people now. I'm the fire chief, like I said, at La Luz, so I work on that side of it a lot. And over the years, there has been a separation of working together, or maybe some animosities built up. Would be one of my primary focuses is getting those two entities working together. I think it's very important that they do work together. As they've said, even some of the services could be combined and cut some costs. So I think it's a big ordeal to get that took care of.
Our next issue is not just for Alamogordo, it's really for the entire state of New Mexico. While much of the nation is really beginning to recover from the Great Recession, New Mexico is struggling with one of the highest unemployment rates in the country. And so there's a lot of focus on how to bring new jobs and keep the jobs that we already have. So our next question is, how would you work to increase economic development? And we begin with Mr. Boss.
One of the things would be, we've already discussed, would be the fun center. That, if that were built, there are several other businesses that want to come into that same area that the fun center is built in, or the bowling alley, and that would, it would be kind of a spark for Alamogordo. We don't have a lot going on. We have grocery stores being built. Grocery stores, the problem with that is there's no New Mexico grocery receipts tax on food sales, so you're not getting a lot of revenue from that. But we need more economic growth, and as all the communities do, and Alamogordo just kind of stays stagnant. And we need something to spark it, and hopefully this might be what would do it.
Mr. Elliott.
Well, we've got a lot of different options that are out there. For example, we have a county economic development team there in Alamogordo that works tirelessly to advertise our city to different companies that are out there in order to try to bring them here. Along with that, we also have another program. It's the Main Street program that's working to beautify the city to help to not only for our residents here to have more pride in the city, but as businesses come in, they see this as a beautiful city it is. And then along with that, we've got another one. It's the Downtown Merchants Association, that they're really working to pull people back into the city. And then another part for the growing economic development is getting people that are willing to take that risk to start up new businesses here, such as the Family Fun Center that we've been talking about tonight, just taking that risk to put up a new business like that. And then also, like I mentioned, getting other businesses to take that same risk to come here to stand up.
Mr. Hahn.
I agree. I think the Family Fun Center is going to be a big spark in economic development. I think it's going to entice business to come in. I think it's going to open up some jobs. And I think it's going to give the town a little boost of fun. So I think it's going to be a good thing. As well as the downtown merchants and the Main Street program to beautify the city is going to be something that's going to clean it up, make it look nice. And I think with working with the public to help clean up the areas, the cars, throw a coat of paint on a house. There's a lot of volunteer organizations that we can help to clean up the city to entice new business here. So another thing I'd like to see is somehow be able to work in maybe some tax breaks or something to entice businesses to come here. I know we don't want to raise taxes and we need revenue, but we also need jobs to come in and get their feet set in the ground and get people to work. So I think there's a lot of different directions we can go with that.
Mr. Baker.
Well, I have a vision for Alamogordo, and it's not just new Walmarts or new grocery stores or new smoke shops. There's a big building on I-25 in the middle of Albuquerque that says Lockheed on the side of it. Those are the kind of jobs I'd like to see in Alamogordo. Well-paying technical jobs. There's no reason that could not be there. Why it isn't there already, I'm not quite sure. But like you said, Fred, this is a state issue too. We can't just think what will make Alamogordo grow. We have to think what will make New Mexico grow. State Representative Yvette Harrell, District 51, has ideas for the state. Some of her ideas are to increase the gross receipts tax. She's against raising the minimum wage. She's for the right to work law. Now, how's she going to raise funds? She wants to transfer public lands. She wants to reopen the logging industry. I just see these as dead in the water. That's not the kind of jobs or the kind of policies that New Mexico wants. And I don't see why we should pursue those kind of things in Alamogordo. We should raise the minimum wage in Alamogordo. That's why I'm an alternate candidate. If Alamogordo was known as a place with good jobs, this would attract more population and would attract more business.
Okay. Our next question, and this one is again an issue not just in Alamogordo, but really all over the state and all over the country. How would you increase citizen engagement with city government? And we begin on this one with Mr. Elliott.
There's a lot of different things you can do, and currently our commission really does a lot. They're working to engage with people on social media. They have newspaper articles that are written, and they're on the radio constantly talking about what all is going on. Unfortunately, it really comes down to the people engaging with the government as well, because it's not only on the part of the local government. The other half is the people actually being interested in what's going on. And we see a lot in that, especially with the commission meetings, there'll be a select few group of people that they'll, oh, bless their hearts, they'll go to every single meeting and they can tell you the history of everything going on. And then you get other people that they're just as important, but they won't attend as regularly. Ways to get them engaged. Something that I thought of is in the past, we've had a program at the high school where they were actually working with the students to teach them politics and whatnot, and they would actually shadow a commissioner and the mayor for a while to learn the job, say for about a week, and then culminated with them actually sitting in the big chair at a commission meeting. So we could do things like that, engaging with our young people, and in doing that, we can bring their parents in as well.
Okay, Mr. Hahn.
Well, I think this is a two-way street. I think the city government itself needs to put all information out in its entirety in several different places. Right now they do the website and social media and such forth like that. Maybe they need to put it in the newspaper. Maybe they need to put it in direct mailings. I know they put information in the water bill. But sometimes a direct mailing rather than an extra paper in your water bill might get seen a little more. But also the citizens have to want to be engaged. They have to want to see this information and they have to get involved. I think over the past few years, though, a lot of people have gotten upset with the city commission meetings and how things go, what they're told as to what it actually is. There's a lot of different variables that have disengaged a lot of the citizens. I think make the commission meetings a little more open to the public. They're pretty formal. I go to the county commission meetings and they're pretty laid back and everybody gets involved. It's a little more comfortable. So I think if you were a little more inviting and a little more open with information and let the citizens engage a little more, I think you'd get a lot more engagement out of the citizens.
Mr. Baker.
Well, it's hard to speak in generalities and just say that there's reasons why people don't come out to vote. Maybe everybody has a different reason, but if we were to just speculate on broad reasons why, probably because, like my fellow candidate said, they feel turned off by city government, they feel like it's not responsive. If I was mayor, I would put a monthly newspaper column in the newspaper, outlining some of the issues, how I felt about them. I'd have some open meetings with just the mayor, meet and greet with the mayor. Come on in, tell me your ideas. I spent some time at the senior center and I found out that a number of the seniors want a new bus. Maybe if the mayor went out into the community and spent time talking to people, they'd feel more engaged, especially the seniors, like I say. Now there's a large population of seniors there. Maybe they don't feel like getting on the bus to go vote. I don't know exactly. But these are ideas that really wouldn't be hard to do. Just go out, spend time, talk to people. I think that's a great job for the mayor. The mayor's a good figurehead. And why not be engaging? Why not be personable? Spend time talking to the people, encourage them, tell them how important it is.
And Mr. Boss.
My brother lives in Roswell, and he told me about the mayor over there. What he does is periodic, it's on a regular basis, but he gives a report in the newspaper to all the citizens of Roswell. I think that would be a good approach, and I also think a lot of attendance and a lot of the meetings that are going on in town, more so than maybe just the ones that the mayor is expected to go to, where you interact with the people and talk with them and invite them to the commission meetings and try to get them involved in it. And also maybe have a little less friction going on in the commission meetings, where people would come and where the meetings were a little better organized. Maybe didn't last as long because they didn't have the bickering going on back and forth, and I think some people would probably come back if that were the case.
Okay, well, once again, early voting is already underway. The election day is Tuesday, March 1st for the Alamogordo Mayor's race. We want to thank our candidates who joined us: James Baker, Richard Boss, Michael Elliott, and Robert Hahn. Thank you all for being with us at KRWG today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Fred.
Thank you.
And thank you at home. I'm Fred Martino, and we want to remind you that this kind of in-depth coverage of elections and local news is only possible with your support. You can become a member or renew your membership anytime online at krwg.org. For all of us at KRWG, thanks for being here.